Picture this. You wake up on a Tuesday morning, the sunlight is streaming through the blinds, and as you're sitting there at the kitchen counter with your coffee, just sort of staring into the middle distance, you realize something profoundly unsettling.
Oh, yeah. That sinking feeling.
Right. You have absolutely no actual lived memory of the previous day. And, I mean, not because of any physical trauma. You didn't hit your head.
It's not some medical crisis.
Exactly. It's not the result of a wild night out or anything like that. It is because of pure, unadulterated absence. You physically moved through the entire schedule of your Monday. You replied to the emails. You loaded the dishwasher.
You smiled at all the right times during those afternoon meetings.
Yeah. You navigated your commute home. But the conscious, living, breathing, perceiving entity that is actually you aren't actually there for a single second of it.
It is honestly a terrifying realization when it finally hits you. You look back at the last 24 hours, or man, sometimes the last 24 months, and you recognize that you are operating as a highly functional ghost in your own life. Like you are just haunting your own routine.
A highly functional ghost.
Yeah.
I mean, that is exactly the phenomenon we are dismantling today. Today's deep dive is about mapping precisely where your mind goes when you ghost your own life and, more importantly, how to permanently change the underlying structure of how you experience reality.
Which is a massive undertaking, but so necessary.
Definitely. So for this particular deep dive, we are embarking on a very special double feature part 1. We're focusing specifically on chapter 1, which is the anatomy of presence, and chapter J, the fractal bridge and cross-domain architecture. Our mission today is to literally hand you a precise, actionable blueprint to stop haunting your life and start actually inhabiting it.
And doing that starting with just a single quarter second of time.
Right. So tell us about the source material we're looking at today.
Yeah, so the source material we are working with to accomplish this is just, it's extraordinary. We are pulling from this really dense collection of texts that span across linguistic mapping, complex systems theory, and the literal architecture of human transformation.
It's heavy stuff.
It is. And I want to set the expectation right away. You know, this is not a discussion about generic mindfulness.
Right. No offense to generic mindfulness, but...
Yeah, but if you came here for advice on, like, taking a deep breath and visualizing a calm ocean to reduce your stress, you are definitely in the wrong place. We are diving into the literal mathematics and the structural engineering of how a human life actually changes.
It's a completely different paradigm.
Exactly. It is precise, it is reproducible, and it basically treats the human experience as this architectural system that can be deconstructed and rebuilt from the ground up.
So if you are listening to this right now, if you are that person who feels like you are constantly juggling a million different self-improvement practices, like you are trying to optimize your career trajectory over here, you're tracking your macros and trying to fix your health over there.
You're reading communication books to save your relationships.
Right. And the sheer effort of managing all these disconnected silos is just leaving you entirely fragmented and exhausted. Well, this deep dive is going to fundamentally change how you view your own development. We are going to show you how all of those separate, exhausting arenas of your life are actually interconnected nodes in a single system. You are about to become the architect of your own meaning.
I love that phrasing. And, you know, the shift from being a passive passenger to an active architect, it really begins with confronting a rather brutal paradox that's introduced early in the text.
The paradox of being here.
Yeah. The paradox is this. You are always spatially, physically here.
Right.
You cannot be anywhere else. But your consciousness is almost never here with a capital H.
It's wild to think about.
It really is. And the sources immediately pivot away from the typical self-help question that everyone asks, which is, you know, how do I stay present? Instead, they ask a far more disruptive, revealing question. They ask, where do you go when you leave?
That pivot, I mean, that just fundamentally changed how I read the rest of the material because, you know, we assume our distraction is just a lack of focus.
Right, like a bug in the system.
Exactly. We assume we're just drifting off into some random, shapeless void of static. But the text breaks down a very precise cartography of absence. We don't just drift, we escape. And we escape to 3 highly specific, heavily guarded domains.
And we do this intelligently, too. It's to protect ourselves from the intensity of the present moment. So let's map the first domain. The text calls this the past, or the land of what was.
The land of what was. Sounds almost poetic until you're trapped in it.
Exactly. When you mentally evacuate the present moment and flee to the past, You are retreating to this psychological landscape where you endlessly replay conversations, you rehash old decisions, and you vividly relive moments you just wish had gone differently. You are scanning history.
And the emotional currency of this domain is heavy. I mean, it's regret, it's nostalgia, it's shame.
Mhm.
But what fascinated me in the sources is why the brain does this. Because we aren't just torturing ourselves for fun, right?
No, not at all.
The brain goes to the past because it is hunting for something. It is hunting for closure.
Precisely. Because evolutionary psychology tells us that the brain reviews past failures to extract a lesson so we don't repeat the mistake, right? It's trying to ensure our survival.
So it's a survival mechanism that just gets stuck.
Yeah. The illusion of the past is that it whispers to you, hey, if we just analyze this one interaction one more time from one more angle, we will finally understand it. We will finally be safe. It promises a resolution.
But it never delivers.
Never. Because the event is already over. No new data can be gathered. So what it actually delivers are these endless, inescapable rumination loops. You basically become trapped in an archive of your own history, endlessly reorganizing files that can never be altered.
Man, you're cataloging your mistakes like some kind of tragic collection.
Hmm.
And then, when the brain gets exhausted by doing that, it swings the pendulum in the complete opposite direction to the second domain, which is the future, the land of what could be.
Right. And the future is the domain of obsessive, relentless planning. It is the rehearsal of disasters that haven't even happened yet. You aren't just building a plan B, you are like building contingencies for your contingency.
Places intimately.
We all do. The currency operating in this domain is anxiety and anticipation.
Which feels incredibly productive in the moment, right? I mean, when I'm lying awake at 2 a.m., mentally drafting 3 different versions of an email I might have to send to a client, depending on how they react, to a meeting that hasn't even taken place
You
yet.
feel like you're working.
Yes. I feel like I'm doing something absolutely necessary.
Because the future domain promises you the ultimate illusion, which is control. It promises safety. The underlying psychological mechanism there is the belief that if you can just computationally simulate every possible angle, every possible failure state, nothing in reality can ever catch you off guard or hurt you.
Trying to outsmart reality.
Exactly. Your brain is trying to pre-solve pain, but the biological cost of this is staggering. Because your nervous system, it doesn't know the difference between a real threat and a vividly imagined one.
Wait, really? It responds the same way?
Biologically, yes. So while you think you are just, planning, your body is pumping cortisol as if the disaster is currently happening in your bedroom. The reality is that this domain delivers pure, unadulterated exhaustion, but it masquerades as productivity.
Which makes perfect sense of the third domain. Because if the past is this inescapable loop of regret and the future is this metabolically exhausting simulation of anxiety, eventually the system is just going to overload.
Right, you just burn out.
And when it overloads, we flee to the third domain, the elsewhere, the land of what isn't.
Yeah, and the elsewhere is where the architecture of modern technology intersects perfectly with our psychological vulnerability. This is the domain of dissolving into the feeds.
The infinite scroll.
Exactly. It's the endless, frictionless scrolling. It is the fragmenting of your attention into a dozen microtasks, checking a tab, swiping an app, refreshing an inbox, and none of these actually matter or require deep cognitive engagement. The currency here is just pure distraction and numbness.
It promises relief from the sheer intensity and, the friction of being alive.
Mm-hmm.
But it delivers a completely hollow synthetic existence. But I want to push back on the framing and the sources for a second here, specifically regarding this third domain.
Okay, go for it.
One of the texts uses this brilliant metaphor of an automated smart home script. It describes a situation where the moment you feel a spike of discomfort, an internal script runs. The lights go off, the phone comes out, the thumb starts scrolling, and all of this happens before conscious thought even registers. And the text calls this an intelligent defense mechanism. But looking at my own life, when I fall into a 2-hour doom-scrolling hole on the couch, it does not feel intelligent. It feels like a lazy dopamine loop. It feels like a total failure of discipline. So are we just sugarcoating addiction by calling it an intelligent defense?
I hear you, but it is so vital that we reframe this. Because pathologizing it as laziness or simply a failure of discipline is exactly the thing that traps you in the cycle. The automated script is the defense mechanism, and it is operating exactly as it was designed to by your nervous system.
Really? Designed to just zone out?
Yes, because the sources rely heavily on the understanding that willpower, the capacity for conscious, effortful self-regulation, is a biological resource. It is a literal battery. Every single time you have to consciously decide to do the hard thing or face the uncomfortable emotion or stay present in a high-friction environment, you burn a massive amount of that battery.
Oh, so it's an energy conservation strategy.
Exactly. When the present moment becomes too intense, maybe it's too painful, maybe it's too boring, or maybe you are just neurologically depleted at the end of a really long day, your brain recognizes that it simply does not have the available bandwidth to process the reality of the present.
And it's empty.
Right. So intelligently, it engineers an evacuation route to help you survive that discomfort without collapsing. The smartphone is just the most frictionless evacuation vehicle ever invented. When we call our own intelligent defenses a failure, we immediately generate a secondary layer of shame.
And shame takes energy too.
Massive amounts of it. What does shame do? It depletes the willpower battery even faster, which then requires even more scope. We have to start viewing our escapes as moral failings. The text demands that we start seeing them as outdated architecture.
Outdated architecture. Wow. That is such a profound shift in perspective. Because if it is a moral failing, you just have to punish yourself into being better, which never works. But if it is architecture, it implies it was built.
Yeah.
And if it was built, it has a structure. And if we can understand the blueprint of that structure, we can dismantle it and redesign it. So if our escapes, the past, future, and elsewhere are architectural, we need to understand the building we are trapped in, right?
We do. And the source material introduces this nested structural model to explain exactly how this architecture holds us captive. It refers to this as the threshold song, and it breaks the architecture of escape down into 3 distinct nested layers. Those are the thresh, the room, and the handler.
It's highly reminiscent of like Russian nesting dolls or the movie Inception, a dream within a dream, a structure within a structure. The text uses a doorway metaphor, but it goes far deeper than just walking through a door.
Much deeper. Let's construct the architecture. Think of the moment you try to stay present as a doorway. You are trying to pass from your current state of distraction into a state of embodied presence. But a doorway does not just float magically in a void. It is physically bound to something. The doorway is framed.
Right, and that frame is what the text calls the thresh.
Yes. The thresh is the immediate edge, the friction, the literal resistance you hit the very second you try to step into the present. And phenomenologically, the thresh is almost always a physical sensation in the body.
It's not a thought.
Usually not initially. It is the sudden, inexplicable tightness in your chest when you sit down to write. It is the frantic, itchy urge in your fingers to pick up your phone when the conversation lags. It is the wave of cold panic or sudden exhaustion that washes over you when you try to just sit quietly with your own mind. That physical sensation is the thresh. It is like the security guard standing in the frame of the doorway.
And most of us spend our entire lives just fighting the security guard. I mean, we try to use brute force willpower to push past that tight chest or that itchy urge. But the text argues that the thresh doesn't exist in a vacuum. The frame is attached to something larger.
Right, because the thresh is held by the room. The room represents the broader context, the environment, or the systemic rules that house the threshold and make the resistance necessary. The thresh is just doing its job based on the rules of the room.
Okay, give me a tangible example of how the room dictates the thresh, because that's a bit abstract.
Let's look at a professional scenario. Suppose you are trying to cultivate the habit of deep, focused, uninterrupted work. That is your goal. You sit at your desk, you close your email, and you try to be fully present with the task. Immediately, you feel a spike of nausea and an overwhelming urge to check your Slack messages.
Yeah, that's the security guard. That's the thresh.
Exactly. That physical panic is the thresh. But why is it there? You have to look at the room. The room, in this case, might be a hyper-responsive corporate culture where taking more than 5 minutes to reply to a message is viewed as a lack of dedication.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. In that specific room, slowing down and being present is genuinely dangerous to your social and professional survival. The thresh is just the alarm system warning you that you are violating the rules of the room.
Okay, that makes so much sense. So the door is held by the frame, which is the physical resistance. The frame is held by the room, which is the external context or culture. But the architecture goes one layer deeper, right? What holds the room?
The room is held by the handler.
The handler.
The handler is the deep, foundational, often subconscious belief structure that holds the entire context in place. It is the internal psychological script that you have internalized as absolute truth. So going back to our corporate example, the handler is the deeply held belief that says, if I am not constantly useful and instantly available, my value drops to zero and I will be abandoned.
Wow. And the sources even mention the handler's handler, which is like the ultimate bedrock beneath the foundation, the inherited generational trauma, the deep cultural conditioning, the actual origin point of the belief itself. Like, my parents only showed me affection when I achieved something, therefore my biological survival is linked to constant output.
Exactly. And this nested structure introduces what the texts call the fourth dimension of transformation. In physical space, we operate in three dimensions, right? Length, width, and height. Time is often considered the fourth in physics. But in the architecture of human transformation, the fourth dimension is the dimension of dependency and holding. It is the study of what allows anything to exist in its current state.
Dependency and holding.
Yes. It asks the systemic question, what is holding this behavior in place? Because a door cannot stand without a frame. A frame cannot stand without a wall. A wall cannot stand without a foundation. When you begin to view your struggles through the fourth dimension of holding, you realize that when you are stuck, you are not just being blocked by a random isolated obstacle, you are being held in place by a mathematically precise architecture of belief, context, and sensation.
That completely obliterates the brute force willpower model of self-help. I mean, we spend so much energy trying to forcefully kick down the door, or we drown in shame because we aren't strong enough to walk through it.
Yeah.
But if we apply the fourth dimension, you don't fight the door. You look at what's holding it.
Exactly. You dismantle the support structures.
So for the person listening right now who realizes they are trapped in an architecture of distraction or anxiety, how do they actually use this blueprint? Because the text outlines a highly practical, sequential, four-step framework for dismantling the architecture in real time.
Yeah, and the framework is designed to bypass shame entirely and activate curiosity. Step one is simply to catch the departure without judgment. The moment you realize you have been scrolling for 30 minutes or you've been obsessing over a past argument, you don't berate yourself. You simply state the fact, oh, I am not here right now. I have left.
Just naming it. And then step two, locate the domain. You look around the mental landscape and identify where the evacuation vehicle took you. Are you dwelling in the regret of the past? Are you spinning in the anxiety of the future? Or are you numb and distracted in the elsewheres? Naming a domain strips it of its vague power.
Right. And step three requires you to move from the mind back into the body. You have to feel the thresh. What is the actual tangible physical sensation occurring at the doorway? Before you can change the behavior, you must locate the biological friction. Is your jaw clenched? Is your breathing shallow? Is there a hollow feeling in your stomach? You simply observe the physical thresh without trying to fix it.
Which is hard, because we always want to fix the bad feeling. And then comes step four, which is the master key to the whole system. Ask the room question. You zoom out from the physical sensation and ask, what context, what underlying rule or belief makes this escape feel completely necessary for my survival right now?
And that is where the transformation occurs. Because once you stop violently fighting the physical sensation of the doorway and you start directly addressing the handler, the underlying belief that your worth is tied to output or that feeling and emotion will destroy you, the structural integrity of the architecture weakens.
It just elapses.
Exactly. You don't have to force the door open. By simply acknowledging the handler that holds the room, the frame loses its tension and the door swings open naturally. You dismantle the resistance by recognizing its dependency.
It's an incredibly elegant system for disarming our deepest defenses. But, that brings up a massive, terrifying question. Okay, let's say I follow the 4 steps. I catch the departure, I locate the domain, I feel the thresh, I address the handler. The architecture dissolves, the door opens, I step through. I am finally, genuinely, undeniably present in the actual moment. What exactly am I supposed to be doing with my consciousness once I'm there? It sounds almost too quiet.
Yeah, it can be disorienting.
Which brings us precisely to the transition point of this deep dive. Let's move from the architecture of the mind into the exact phenomenological mechanics of lived experience. Let's look at Chapter J, the Fractal Bridge.
If Chapter 1 is about how to stop escaping the room, Chapter J is about what you actually do once you are standing inside it. The source material shifts from identifying absence to defining the precise granular texture of presence. It introduces a concept that redefines how we measure our lives, which is the quarter second. The text posits the quarter second as the phenomenological atomic unit of human experience.
Now, just to clarify for the listener, we are not talking about a literal, strict measurement of 0.25 seconds on a digital stopwatch, are we?
No, it is a phenomenological unit. Cognitive science shows us that human perception operates in rapid microcycles. The time it takes for a visual stimulus to hit the retina process through the visual cortex, and register as conscious thought is roughly in the neighborhood of a few hundred milliseconds.
Okay, got it.
So the quarter second is the text's metaphor for this granular atomic flash of lived reality. It is the smallest indivisible unit of now. And what the sources reveal about how we normally utilize this unit is staggering. In our normal, everyday baseline consciousness, we suffer from what we could call an alternating delay.
The delay between living and knowing we are living.
Exactly. The text breaks consciousness down into two modes. First, there is perceptive participation. This is when you are fully immersed in doing something, feeling something, or experiencing something.
Yeah.
You are the actor in the play.
Okay, perceptive participation.
Second, there is receptive participation. This is when you step back and cognitively think about, analyze, or judge what you are experiencing. You are the critic watching the play. In a normal state of consciousness, we constantly alternate between these two states. We never do both at the exact same time.
Right. There's always a gap. I mean, I take a bite of an incredible meal that's perceptive. I taste the spices, I feel the texture, but my mind is quiet. Then a second later, the perceptive state turns off and the receptive state turns on. Wow, that's a lot of salt. I wonder what recipe they used. I shouldn't eat too much of this.
Exactly. You act, and then you evaluate. You experience, and then you judge.
Which means I am never actually fully inhabiting the moment, because a significant portion of my cognitive bandwidth is always hovering slightly outside of time, analyzing the past microsecond.
You are perpetually one step behind your own existence, but the text introduces the antidote to this delay, a state it calls saturated synergization. In a saturated quarter second, the alternation stops. You achieve dual participation.
Dual participation?
Yeah.
Meaning doing both at once.
Yes. You manage to hold both perceptive and receptive participation simultaneously. You are entirely, completely immersed in the visceral experience of the moment, and D, you are fully, consciously aware of the experience without the critical delay.
The analogies the sources provide to illustrate this are some of the most beautiful parts of the text, because it's a difficult concept to grasp abstractly. Think about the difference between an amateur musician and a master virtuoso.
Oh, that's a great one.
Right. When an amateur is learning to play the guitar, they are entirely locked into perceptive participation. They are staring at their fingers, sweating over the fretboard, dedicating 100% of their bandwidth to the pure mechanical act of hitting the right chord. They cannot hear the music. They can only feel the friction of the strings.
But the master musician operates entirely differently. Their fingers move automatically across the fretboard. They are executing the complex mechanics of the instrument perfectly, but simultaneously, their awareness is vast.
They're hearing everything.
Everything. They are listening to the holistic sound of the entire symphony around them. They are feeling the emotional resonance of the rhythm. They are reading the energy of the audience, and they are micro-adjusting their dynamic expression in real time. They are fully in the action and fully aware of the context. That is the dual participation of a saturated quarter second.
There's another brilliant example in the text regarding everyday interactions. The student in office hours. Imagine a university student sitting across from a professor they admire. The student asks a highly complex question driven by genuine, burning curiosity. That is perceptive participation. They're deeply embedded in the intellectual exchange.
Right.
But simultaneously, while listening to the professor's answer, a parallel track of awareness is running. The student notices, oh, look at the professor's body language. When I stop trying to sound smart and just ask honest questions, their shoulders drop, their tone softens, and the relational field opens up.
That is receptive participation occurring at the exact same millisecond. The student is not just acquiring the intellectual data of the professor's answer, they are absorbing the relational pattern of the interaction. They are in the moment, and they are learning the metastructure of the moment simultaneously.
But I have to stop here because while that sounds like an enlightened way to live, applying it to daily life sounds utterly exhausting. I mean, if I am trying to have a simple dinner with a friend, and I'm supposed to be deeply enjoying my food, actively tracking the conversational thread, while simultaneously running a meta-analysis on the relational dynamics and monitoring my own internal state, my brain is going to melt.
It would. It completely would.
Human beings do not have the working memory or the cognitive bandwidth to run that many conscious processes at once. So how is this practically achievable?
And the text anticipates that exact objection because it is the most common failure point of mindfulness practices. If you try to force dual participation in the moment through sheer willpower, you will inevitably create a state of performative presence.
performative presence, like watching yourself be present.
Exactly. You become so obsessed with trying to be present that you detach from reality entirely to monitor your own presence. It is exhausting and self-defeating. The architectural secret the sources reveal is a mechanism called pre-cohesive curation.
Pre-cohesive curation, meaning curating the environment before the cohesive moment occurs.
Precisely. You do not generate the bandwidth for dual participation in the moment. You liberate the bandwidth before the moment arrives. The text outlines 4 specific domains you must curate prior to the event: the physical, the cognitive, the relational, and the structural.
Walk me through how curating these domains actually frees up cognitive bandwidth. Let's start with the physical.
Okay, so physical curation is about regulating the nervous system. If you enter a high-stakes conversation while your sympathetic nervous system is highly activated, your heart rate is elevated, cortisol is high, you are in a mild state of fight or flight. A massive percentage of your cognitive bandwidth is automatically hijacked by the brain to scan the environment for physical threats.
Right, your body thinks a tiger is in the room.
Exactly. You cannot be fully present because your biology is preparing for combat. Pre-cohesive physical curation means taking the 5 minutes before the meeting to do physiological sighs, lower your heart rate, and signal safety to the body. You literally reclaim the bandwidth that was being stolen by survival mechanisms.
That makes total sense. What about cognitive curation?
Well, the human brain has a very limited working memory. If you sit down to do deep work, but you are subconsciously holding on to the fact that you need to buy milk, call your mother, and pay a parking ticket, your brain is burning energy, keeping those open loops active.
The open tabs in your brain.
Right. Cognitive curation is the act of externalizing those loops. You write down the distractions, you clear the mental RAM. By offloading the clutter onto a piece of paper, you free up the processing power required to hold the dual participation of the saturated quarter second.
Okay, and relational curation.
Relational curation involves establishing a baseline of trust and psychological safety before the deep interaction begins. If you are constantly wondering if the other person is judging you or if there is unaddressed tension in the room, your receptive awareness is dominated by anxiety. Curating the relational field might mean explicitly stating intentions up front or clearing the air so that the bandwidth spent on hypervigilance is reallocated to genuine connection.
That's huge. And finally, structural curation.
Structural curation is defining the boundaries of the engagement. It is knowing exactly what your focus is and what it isn't. It is the master musician knowing the scale they are playing in. When the parameters are set, you don't waste energy deciding what to do next. You can simply pour all your awareness into how you are doing it.
So pre-cohesive curation is the ultimate leverage. You aren't forcing awareness through willpower. You've simply designed an environment, internally and externally, where dual participation becomes the path of least resistance. You automate the mechanics so you can hear the symphony.
Beautifully put, yes. And once you have curated the conditions and you are capable of stepping into and holding that saturated quarter second, we arrive at the macro architecture of the texts. We arrive at the concept of the fractal bridge.
The Fractal bridge.
Right. The profound question becomes, how do these microscopic 0.25-second atomic flashes of presence actually translate into altering the trajectory of an entire human life?
Because modern culture has conditioned us to believe that transformation is a cinematic event. We want the lightning bolt epiphany. We want the dramatic montage where the music swells, we run up a flight of stairs in the rain, and suddenly, magically, we are an entirely new, disciplined, enlightened person. But the texts aggressively dismantle that myth.
Oh, completely. The cinematic model of transformation is a lie that breeds perpetual disappointment. The sources introduce the accumulation principle. Transformation is not an event. It is a mathematical certainty born from the strict, unrelenting accumulation of saturated quarter seconds. And this accumulation scales fractally, meaning the structure of the micro mirrors the structure of the macro.
Let's explicitly map out this fractal scale for the listener, because the math provided in the sources is incredibly clarifying. We start at the bottom, right?
We do. The foundation is the atomic level. This is the quarter second itself, a single fleeting flash of dual participation where you are entirely present and aware. It is the absolute smallest building block of change.
Okay.
Moving up one order of magnitude, we reach the molecular level. 1 minute. To achieve a single molecular unit of transformation, you must sustain dual participation without breaking the chain for roughly 240 consecutive quarter seconds.
240 atomic units just to get 1 minute of pure presence. When you break it down like that, you realize why sustained focus feels so difficult. It requires an immense density of accumulation. and it scales up from there to the cellular level.
Right. The cellular level represents a 30 to 60-minute continuous session. This is what we colloquially call a flow state, a period of incredibly deep, uninterrupted work, or a profoundly intimate, timeless conversation. It requires tens of thousands of quarter seconds. Above that is the tissue level, a day. A highly present, saturated day where you are moving through your routine with minimal escapes to the past, future, or elsewhere requires accumulating roughly 20,000 saturated quarter seconds.
And finally, the apex of the fractal scale, the organism.
Yeah.
A complete cycle of transformation.
Exactly. To fundamentally move from who you are to who you are becoming, to permanently wire a new structural capacity into your nervous system, requires a massive accumulation. The texts estimate this at 1,000 or more saturated quarter seconds dedicated to a specific domain.
1,000,000 quarter seconds. The text uses the example of building a permanent structural fitness habit. It posits that a transformation of that magnitude requires roughly 500,000 saturated quarter seconds of active engagement.
Right.
Now, when most people decide they want to change their body, they look at the distance between where they are and where they want to be, and they conclude that the only variable they can manipulate is time. They think, I just need to spend more hours at the gym. I need to grind harder. I need to wake up earlier.
That's the trap.
But time is a finite, inflexible resource. There is a hard mathematical ceiling on your time. You literally cannot spend 40 hours a week at the gym without destroying your physical joints, neglecting your family, or losing your job. So if time is capped, how do you accelerate the transformation?
This is where the mathematical brilliance of the system reveals itself. You don't need more time. You need more saturation.
Saturation, okay.
Since the requirement for transformation is the accumulation of saturated quarter seconds, the variable you must manipulate is the density of presence within the time you already have. Let's look at the formula the text provides.
Yeah, walk us through the math.
Imagine two different people going to the gym for exactly 1 hour. Person A shows up, but they've done zero pre-cohesive curation. Their nervous system is frayed. While they are on the treadmill, their mind is agonizing over a work email, which is the past, or dreading a meeting, which is the future.
So they're physically there, but mentally gone.
Exactly. They are physically moving their limbs, but their cognitive participation is fractured. They might be operating at a 30% saturation rate. Out of the 14,400 quarter seconds available in that hour, only 4,320 are actually saturated with presence.
Now look at person B.
Person B spends 5 minutes in the car doing pre-cohesive curation. They regulate their breathing. They leave their phone in the locker to structurally eliminate the elsewhere. They step onto the gym floor and achieve dual participation.
Right.
They are feeling the exact biomechanical contraction of the muscle while simultaneously holding awareness of their physiological exertion. They are operating at a 60% saturation rate. In that exact same 60-minute window, person B accumulates 8,640 saturated quarter seconds.
The implications of that math are staggering. By doubling the saturation rate from 30% to 60%, person B literally cuts the chronological timeline of the entire transformation in half. They will achieve the required 500,000 saturated quarter seconds in half the weeks it takes.
Person A.
Person B did not work a single hour longer. They did not lift heavier weights. They simply operated with a higher density of consciousness.
It is the ultimate systemic leverage. Consciousness compresses time. The depth of your presence directly dictates the speed of your neuroplasticity. The brain wires faster when it is fully attending to the stimulus.
Okay, so let's assume the listener successfully applies all of this. They've mastered the architecture. They stopped escaping. They utilized pre-cohesive curation to sustain saturated quarter seconds. They leveraged the fractal bridge, accumulated the 500,000 units, and successfully completed a massive cycle of transformation. Let's say they spent 6 months and finally built that rock-solid fitness habit. Or they spent a year learning how to write and publish essays online. They won the battle in that specific arena. What happens next? Does the journey just start over from zero in the next area of their life?
And this is where we pivot to the second half of Chapter J, which explores the most advanced concept in the material, cross-domain architecture.
Cross-domain architecture.
This concept is perhaps the most paradigm-shifting idea in the entire collection of texts, because it directly assaults how modern society structures human development. We suffer deeply from a cultural fallacy that the text identifies as the myth of isolated transformation.
The silo effect.
Exactly. We mentally organize our lives into distinct, hermetically sealed boxes. We have our career box, our health and fitness box, our relationship box, our financial box, and our creative box. The myth dictates that these domains operate independently. We believe that spending an hour improving the health box has absolutely zero impact on the financial box. We view progress as domain-specific.
Right, like being good at one thing doesn't make you good at another. But the text argues the exact opposite. It posits that the true capacities we forge in the fires of transformation are structural, not superficial. They're architectural beams, not just the paint on the walls.
Correct. Let's use the public writing cycle example drawn directly from the source material. Imagine you dedicate a massive accumulation of saturated quarter seconds to learning how to write essays and publish them online. If you look at this through the siloed, superficial view, you might say, well, I improved my vocabulary, I learned how to format a blog post, and I figured out how to hit the publish button. You view the skill as hyper-specific to the creative box.
But if we look at the underlying architecture, what did you actually build?
Structurally, you built something far more profound than typing skills. By repeatedly putting your thoughts into the public sphere and facing inevitable criticism or indifference, you forged the internal structural capacity to be visible without needing universal approval. You build the neurological tolerance to withstand external judgment while remaining anchored in your authentic expression.
And here is the magic of cross-domain architecture. That structural capacity is not confined to a keyboard. It is a fundamental upgrade to your operating system.
Exactly. That exact same structural capacity instantly cascades across the artificial walls of your silos. If you have built the architectural strength to be visible without universal approval on the internet, you suddenly possess the exact capacity required to sit down with your partner and have a highly vulnerable, difficult conversation where you risk their disapproval to speak your truth.
Oh, wow.
You suddenly possess the capacity to walk into a boardroom, look your boss in the eye, and negotiate your salary without crumbling under the pressure of their judgment. The underlying architecture is identical.
The sources provide another phenomenal example with the fitness transformation. When you spend a year dragging yourself to the gym at 5 a.m., the superficial, siloed view says, I learned how to deadlift, and I increased my cardiovascular endurance. But structurally, what you actually built was the capacity for self-accountability when no one is watching. You built the ability to endure acute, short-term physical discomfort for the sake of long-term physiological gain.
And if you extract that specific structural capacity from the gym, you realize it is the exact same tool required to fix your financial box. Budgeting requires self-accountability when no one is watching, and the endurance of short-term restriction for long-term compounding wealth. It is the exact same capacity required for a novelist to sit in an empty room and write when there is no external deadline forcing them to do so.
But I have to ask the hard question here, because while the theory is beautiful, reality is messy. If this structural capacity transfers so seamlessly, why are there so many highly disciplined people whose lives are completely asymmetrical?
Yeah, that's a fair question.
I personally know people who are absolute machines at the gym. They are elite athletes, they track every macro, they never miss a workout. They clearly possess the capacity for self-accountability and enduring discomfort. Yet their personal finances are an absolute disaster. They're drowning in credit card debt, and their intimate relationships are a chaotic mess. If the capacity is structural, why isn't it automatically cascading to save the other domains of their life?
That is the exact trap, and it is a crucial nuance that the source material addresses beautifully. Cross-domain transfer does not happen automatically by osmosis. The brain is highly contextual. Those elite athletes have indeed forged the structural capacity, but they have left it locked inside the context of the gym.
They haven't applied it elsewhere.
Right. They haven't built the neurological bridges required to transport that capacity into a new domain. The text explicitly outlines the 3 bridges of transfer that you must consciously, actively cross to initiate the cascade.
Let's lay down the bridges. Bridge 1 is recognition.
Recognition is the act of decoupling the capacity from the context. You have to explicitly name the underlying structural beam, not the surface skill. If the gym goer looks at their success and tells themselves, my superpower is that I am really good at lifting heavy iron plates, the capacity will remain trapped in the gym. Iron plates don't exist in a spreadsheet.
So what do they need to recognize?
To cross the first bridge, they must look deeper and recognize. My actual capacity is the ability to metabolize short-term friction into long-term growth, independent of my current emotional motivation.
You have to strip the capacity down to its architectural essence. Then comes bridge 2, mapping.
Once you have recognized and named the pure structural capacity, you must scan the landscape of your entire life and ask a diagnostic question. Where else in my life is the exact absence of this capacity currently creating a bottleneck or a failure?
So the gym goer looks at their mountain of credit card debt. Instead of feeling shame and thinking they are just bad with money, they map the capacity. They realize, I am actively avoiding the short-term friction of looking at my bank statements and saying no to impulses, and that avoidance is destroying my long-term financial health.
Hmm.
The financial domain is starving for the exact capacity I use every morning on the squat rack.
Exactly. Which leads directly to Bridge 3, application. Recognition and mapping are cognitive, but application is experiential. You deliberately practice invoking the recognized capacity in the new domain.
How does that look practically?
This is not a metaphor. It is a neurological hijacking. You sit down at your kitchen table with your laptop to finally do your budget. You will inevitably feel the thresh, the anxiety, the urge to escape to the elsewhere. In that moment, you consciously summon the exact same internal physiological and psychological posture you use when you step under a heavy barbell.
Wow.
You breathe the same way. You anchor yourself the same way. You tell your nervous system, we are doing a heavy lift, just in a different room. You apply the capacity until the new domain stabilizes.
And when you begin consciously building these bridges across multiple domains of your life, you initiate what the text refers to as the multiplication formula. This is the ultimate systemic shift. When the silos are broken down, the domains don't just add value to each other linearly, they feed back into each other exponentially.
It creates a virtuous, compounding, systemic spiral. Let's track the cascade. You build the capacity for presence in your physical health, which deeply regulates your nervous system and amplifies your baseline energy.
Right.
That elevated physical energy is transferred via the bridges into your creative box, leading to higher quality work output. That accelerated creative output inevitably advances your career box, which fundamentally lowers the stress in your financial box. The elimination of chronic financial anxiety frees up massive amounts of cognitive bandwidth, which deepens your capacity for saturated dual participation in your relationship box.
And it just keeps going.
It does. Those deepened, secure relationships provide a profound emotional safety net that further regulates your nervous system, which fuels even better physical health. The domains are no longer isolated, draining each other. They are a unified, multiplying ecosystem. 1 plus 1 doesn't equal 2 anymore, it equals 10.
It is utterly staggering when you zoom out and look at the sheer scale of the architecture we have traversed today. We began by confronting the horror of waking up as a ghost, a passenger mindlessly haunting the routines of a Tuesday. We mapped our intelligent but outdated escapes to the regret of the past, the anxiety of the future, and the synthetic numbness of the elsewhere.
And we didn't stop there.
No, we deconstructed the architecture holding our resistance in place, identifying the physical thresh, the contextual room, and the foundational handler. We learned how to stop bruising our shoulders, trying to batter down the doorway, and instead, how to dissolve the architecture through awareness.
Which is such a relief.
From there, we stepped into the saturated quarter second, utilizing pre-cohesive curation to liberate the bandwidth necessary for true dual participation. And finally, we use the fractal bridge to scale those tiny atomic moments of presence into massive, cascading cross-domain transformations that rewrite the fundamental operating system of human life.
It is nothing short of a complete re-engineering of how we conceptualize and execute our existence in the world. But before we bring this deep dive to a close, there is one final lingering concept drawn from the absolute deepest strata of these source texts. We must address it because leaving it out would imply a falsehood.
What's the concept?
It is a concept the text called the transmission mechanism.
And what exactly is the transmission mechanism? Because everything we've discussed so far, curating your environment, finding your thresholds, building cross-domain bridges, sounds like highly internal, solitary work. It sounds like something you do alone in a room with a journal.
Right, and that is the illusion of Western individualism, and the text completely shatters it. Everything we have discussed implies you are engineering this architecture in a vacuum. But human transformation is not solely an individual computational pursuit. It travels through the relational field. It is biological.
Explain the mechanism. How does architecture travel between people?
It relies on the neurobiology of co-regulation and the mirror neuron system. Let's say you are desperately struggling to build a specific structural capacity. For example, the capacity to maintain regulated dual participation presence during a heated interpersonal conflict.
Okay, a common struggle.
You have tried the four-step framework, you have tried pre-cohesive curation, but the handler of your childhood trauma is so strong that the moment conflict arises, you evacuate to the exit. Elsewhere, your nervous system simply does not know how to hold the architecture of calm presence. The text explains that you do not have to build that capacity from scratch, alone.
You can borrow it.
Exactly. Simply by placing yourself in close physical or deep relational proximity to someone who already possesses and embodies that structural capacity, you alter your own biological math. When you sit across from someone who remains deeply grounded, breathing slowly, and holding a state of saturated presence during a conflict, your mirror neurons detect their physiological state.
Oh, wow.
Through the mechanism of limbic resonance and nervous system co-regulation, your brain automatically begins to mimic their architecture. In their presence, you literally borrow their capacity. You find yourself able to act with more calm, clarity, and presence than your isolated system could ever generate on its own.
It's like a tuning fork. If you strike a powerful tuning fork and bring it close to a silent one, the silent one begins to vibrate at the exact same frequency simply through proximity.
That is a perfect biological analogy. And here is the crucial part. Over time, through repeated exposure to their relational field and repeated borrowing of their frequency, your nervous system maps the pathway. The borrowed capacity eventually becomes a permanent structural beam within your own architecture. You don't just learn intellectual data from the people around you, you literally catch their architecture.
That is one of the most profound and challenging ideas I have ever encountered. It means that who we choose to surround ourselves with isn't just a matter of finding people with good vibes or shared hobbies. The relational field is literal structural engineering.
It absolutely is.
The people in our lives are either providing the scaffolding we need to build new capacities, or they are reinforcing the handlers that keep us trapped in the room. It's an architectural decision about what frequencies we have access to.
It forces a ruthless audit of your environment. You have to ask yourself, are the people around me transmitting the architecture I am trying to build? Or are they transmitting the architecture I am trying to escape?
Which brings us to the final challenge, the call to action for everyone listening to this right now. I want you to look at the rooms you are currently standing in. Look at the specific thresholds, the physical friction that you are facing in your career, your health, your relationships. Are you going to keep bruising your shoulder, using exhausted willpower to fight a locked door?
Or are you finally ready to ask the deeper questions?
Right, to address the handler and to systematically redesign the architecture of your life 1/4 second at a time. And perhaps most importantly, looking at the truth of the transmission mechanism. Whose relational field are you stepping into tomorrow to help you build it?
The math of reality is impartial. It is simply waiting for you to engage with it as an architect, rather than a victim of its design.
Because at the end of the day, when you wake up next Tuesday morning and the sunlight hits the kitchen counter, you do not have to be a ghost. You can remember the day before. You can feel the heat of the coffee cup in your hand. You can be fully, completely, unapologetically here. Because in the mathematics of reality, you are the architect. Have a beautiful, saturated week, everyone. We will see you in part 2.